Well, thank you all. All right, now that the recording started, thank you all for being here. Appreciate your time coming to the office this morning. And we're going to go through a couple of items. You've seen the agenda, but I want to first open things up for public comment in case we have anyone calling in online other than Ron. And Randy, we do see you being brought on as a panelist right now too. Can you? There he is. Just before we get started, Randy, you can hear us okay, and go ahead and unmute and just say something so we know that you're.
Yeah, I can hear you guys just fine, and apologies, I did not catch the in-person only declaration on there, so my bad on that.
No worries, Randy. You're just missing out on coffee and donuts, but more for us. I will squirrel them away in my backpack. All right, so we're gonna kind of move forward this morning, kind of picking up where we left off at the last meeting. We're gonna do a bit of a brief recap on, the program as a whole, and then we're gonna have a chance to discuss, kind of next steps in terms of implementation. Also, I think this is a good opportunity for us as the oversight board members to speak with staff about what we would like to see in terms of monthly meetings and regular updates. Have some ideas around financial reporting, sub-grantees, vendors, staffing, things of that nature. These are pretty broad subject areas, but we'll get to that after the staff have had a chance to go through their work. But any other questions or changes before we go ahead and get started? All right, Robert, go ahead and take it away.
Was that me? I think maybe we need to.
All right,
maybe meeting summary, or the meeting summary. Is that something we adopt?
Do we adopt a meeting?
I don't think it's necessary.
Okay,
I mean, just basically, if you
good.
have any changes,
Yeah.
then just let us know and we'll make it appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the second agenda item, really, we do want to be kind of conversational about what's useful for you all and kind of give you all a chance to give some initial feedback on what we presented at the last meeting. But before that, we didn't get to Greg last time in his program, so we're going to start where we left off last meeting.
Do attendance or?
Yes. You want to do a roll call? Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess we could do a roll call. I figured a sign in share was good.
Doug Rex.
Here.
Steve Barr.
Here.
Richard Kondo.
Here.
Steve Douglas.
Here.
Brian Wan. Andrew Holter. Steve Douglas.
Sorry, do that one.
Okay. Emily Bear. Nicole Spear.
Here.
Christian Willis.
Rest stand, stand again.
Okay. Cher Walker Ravenel. Stephen Shepard.
Here.
And then Randy Drinnen.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, guys. So with that being said, now I guess we can start moving on to Greg for the Building Policy Collective, or unless Robert, you want to kick things off. Greg, thank you again, by the way, and being willing to change out your timing.
Always happy to be around here. All right, get that going. So as Cam's pulling things up, my name is Greg Meow. I'm the program manager for the Building Policy Collaborative. I'm an attorney by trade. I've spent most of my career working with local jurisdictions on passing local building, housing policy, mostly in the weatherization and sort of safety and public health space, but really excited to sort of bring those skill sets here and work with you all and all of our communities in adopting and passing, ambitious building decarbonization policies. So if you want to go ahead, Cam. So what's the problem? Why do we need a building policy collaborative? Well, there's a number of issues that we face in our sort of general legal and policy context right now. There's a real inconsistent patchwork of local building codes and regulations and processes throughout not only our region, but across the country. And that can make it really difficult for residents and businesses to navigate sort of what our policies are and install things and achieve some of the goals that we're working towards. There's a significant cost and challenges for local governments in adopting and implementing and enforcing building codes, and decarbonization policies. While fundamentally the goals of these policies are often pretty simple, if it was just electrification, people kind of understand that. There's a lot of nuances that go into policy and a lot of legal restrictions that we have to navigate in order to make sure our policies are feasible. And then, when you get down to the tangible, getting into people's homes, monitoring, enforcing, the ins and outs of those policies, there's a lot of detail that goes into that. So that's the second challenge that we're facing. And then third, as I sort of previewed, we have a pretty big challenge with regards to the regulatory landscape. It's evolving and shifting for us, and there's a lot of need for working together to be able to figure out what the implications of some of those changes in the regulations are. So, we can actually go back. So how we're going to solve this problem? Well, we're going to be providing peer support for our communities in the policy adoption and implementation process. There's a lot that goes into policy adoption, a lot of roadblocks that that jurisdictions can face, a lot of opposition that policies can face. And so I think what we're really going to try to do is make sure that no jurisdiction feels like they're going it alone. No jurisdiction feels like they're kind of out there on an island, but they can seek support from their peers, troubleshoot with their peers, and navigate the challenges as they arise with their peers. We're also providing financial support for the participating jurisdictions. We know that policy adoption and implementation are staff intensive, and certainly when you get to implementation and enforcement, you need to be able to hire up staff to go out and actually enforce these programs. So we'll be providing jurisdictional awards to our local participating jurisdictions to do that. And we know that there's, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and that there is some policy opposition here, we'll be doing and providing, or we've earmarked a lot of money for research to address some of those information gaps, information challenges, misinformation, and support our jurisdictions in their communication needs as they go for policy adoption and implementation. And we'll be doing this, can you go to the next slide, through the Building Policy Collaborative. That's the program that I'm running. The purpose of the collaborative really is to drive, these healthy, efficient, and pollution-free new and existing buildings through the adoption of new building policies and regulations. The purpose of the collaborative is to do this in, a coordination with our peer communities to really try to address some of those concerns around that patchwork framework, to make it easier for our vendors and our residents to navigate sort of the regulations that exist in this area, and overall really to work together with the other aspects of this program to lower energy cost burdens for occupants, and to transform the market. The regulatory arm is definitely one part that's going to be really influential on how the market develops moving forward. Next slide. So the first aspect of the Building Policy Collaborative is the jurisdictional support program. This is the biggest chunk of the money that we've earmarked for providing money to localities for any of the needs that they've identified. And I'll go into that in a little bit, but on average, if everyone got the same amount, it would average out to about $600,000 over the course of 4 years, which is what we've generally budgeted as one full FTE, worth of salary over the course of 4 years, loaded. Our real goal this year is to get this money to our jurisdictions ASAP. So we're deep in the process. I'm working with Mara on this in particular, to develop and finalize our grant application materials. And we're hoping to really run that up the chain through this committee to the full board in the coming months, with the real goal of opening the grant application somewhere around July or August, and then moving into sort of making those awards come this fall, and getting jurisdictions drawing down that money as soon as possible. What we've done so far and the way that this has been developed has been through a working group format with participating jurisdictions. And generally speaking, I think we've had 30 to 40 folks showing up from various jurisdictions in the DRCOG region, starting in November, really. And we have our next meeting next Monday, But going through that process of sort of developing what the grant criteria are, the eligible uses of the funds would be, and what the sort of how we're gonna divide all this money up between our jurisdictions. So if you wanna go to the next slide, Cam. You know, local government feedback so far has influenced what the grant design is going to look like. And we are really looking at sort of 2 rounds of funding. The first round, which we're gonna try to get out this summer, and you know, responding to local feedback, is going to be based on a formula that we've been developing that sort of meets the criteria and the goals that were identified in the grant application, that RCPRG grant application. So applying that formula based on sort of existing population and existing jobs, so to try to account for basically the you know, the built infrastructure and the buildings in our communities now, as well as then using some projections based on DRCOG data for future growth, and then you know, accounting for then sort of representation of how big your jurisdiction is relative to overall DRCOG you know, population. So we were deep in developing that. That is the item that I'll be bringing to you all essentially at our next meeting for a deeper discussion of like, what are the actual the metrics, how are we weighting everything, what does that mean in terms of the overall distribution amongst the DRCOG jurisdictions. But that's sort of how we've been developing it, responding to local government feedback. If you want to go to the next slide as well. We've also, the other big criteria obviously for the grant really is the, you know, what can you use the money for? So local jurisdictions identified really staff capacity, as well as sort of some of the back end policy planning and data tracking as some of the core uses. So we are in the process of narrowing down within our grant guidance documents, sort of what does that look like? How can you apply for this? And trying to make that grant application as easy as possible for our jurisdictions. You can go to the next slide. So here's some of the next steps that we have coming up. As I mentioned, we've got our March 17th workshop. That's sort of our final. We'll be running and vetting the metrics for the jurisdictional awards through that group, getting some feedback. We are then going to hope to finalize and publish a sort of pre-grant package for people to be able to provide written comment back to us. And it says May, that's because this was submitted to this group 2 weeks early. April is, you know, we're planning on bringing this to the oversight committee, the tech committee, for first real deep dive discussion on what the criteria are, so that we can bring it to this group back in May for approval, ideally, and then ideally you can open our grant starting July 1st. Really with that goal of knowing that our jurisdictions need to be planning for staff capacity and budgeting for that ASAP right now. So that's why we're trying to get them what their award will be, like actual numbers on Monday, so that, you know, come September, October, when we finalize contracting with them, they can have already begun their hiring process, they can begin drawing down funds for reimbursement for that staff position. All right, next slide. So then the second aspect of our grant or our program is the Building Policy Collaborative Peer Network. We're in the process of finalizing whether it's going to be called the BPC Peer Network or just the collaborative. That will be ironed out in the next few weeks. But roughly speaking, we've earmarked, we have a $2.5 million contract that we're bringing to our Finance and Budget Committee next week for approval for a vendor to facilitate a community practice essentially around policy adoption and implementation. So as a requirement of accepting your jurisdictional award, it's not a competitive grant, but as a requirement of taking that money, you'll have to participate in our peer network so that we can help support you through the policy adoption and implementation process. We have the real benefit of the Metro cohort, the existing sort of codes cohort that's done a lot of work to help pilot some of, you know, what does it mean? What are the right policies for all of our jurisdictions to be pursuing? We're going to take, you know, some of that and try to harness that and leverage that work to come together to really develop a roadmap for how all of our jurisdictions are going to meet our net zero goals by 2030. And sort of what the policy package is that's going to get us there. So it's going to be code updates, but it's also going to be things like building performance standards and other policies that will help us achieve our goals. So yeah, we are contracting ideally beginning next week. And as soon as they're on board, we will be starting some of that planning. I know that they're very eager to begin working with us to sort of figure out the cadence of meetings with all of our jurisdictions. What we're hoping to do ultimately is to have a few, maybe roughly quarterly in-person meetings with all of our jurisdictions so everyone knows that we're working together, while also sort of identifying what are the natural subgroups that are going to pop up within the needs of the communities. So roughly 6 or so sub-cohorts will probably pop up, to be determined whether or not that's based on jurisdictional size and capacity, or whether that's based on sort of where they are in their code updates already. We want to make sure that we're accommodating everyone who wants to move fast, while also supporting everyone to move faster than sort of state minimums are going to be requiring us to, and making sure that we can really lean on that peer learning from those that have really piloted some of the policies going forward. So we will sort of launch this, probably not fall. We're actually hoping maybe to get the first full peer network meeting prior to actually having our jurisdictional awards out. So I'm thinking in that July period where we're gonna have like a launch meeting with all of our participating communities, at least to preview how they can use their awards, what the whole community practice will actually look like. So next slide. Here are some of the policy goals that we'll be working towards. We talk about a roadmap, and I don't know if it's supposed to be such a switchback laden hiking path. But that's good. Like, it's good not to go straight up the mountain. Sometimes you need to take your time and make sure you're ready. So we'll be developing this. This is not what the final roadmap is going to look like, but there will be a policy package starting with building code updates. But it's, essentially knowing that a lot of our work is going to be on existing buildings. We're really going to be pushing on, getting our communities to be, accepting of sort of what the existing building policy goals are, and adopting some performance standards or other forms of regulation that will help us sort of address the emissions that come from that building stock. There are some other maybe secondary policies that we'll also be pursuing around essentially making sure that we're trying to streamline things across the region, addressing that kind of patchwork element. And if Clay has his way, we'll work on contractor licensing too. Next slide. So the last aspect, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, quick question on the last slide. Mm-hmm. So, there's already statewide building performance standards. Mm-hmm. So are you looking at trying to go below the 50,000 square feet? Is that why that's on there?
That's why that's
okay.
There. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, just to make, because we're working on changes to the existing, and I know that Denver already goes to right. So, and Lakewood is working on stuff so I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Mm-hmm. That we're looking at under 50,000 square feet in order to hit the part that the state's not.
Yeah, and really to close the gap in the regulatory gap right there. Yeah, that's exactly right. So then the last aspect of our program is the research element. This is probably the one that we're still playing with the most in terms of what the overall structure looks like. We've earmarked $1 million of our grant to go towards research. We're currently in the process of developing an RFQ to really vet and solicit and identify all of the vendors that we might be able to work with. There's a few research needs we know that we've identified up front, so we'll be answering those so that we can, as we're starting our policy adoption process, we've already got some of the answers on hand that we need. But we're also trying to figure out exactly what are the ongoing research needs moving forward. How much should we be reserving to address questions that pop up, as we're going through this process. But some of the areas of research are sort of really to do the as applied research here for the case making in our region of what are the impacts of the policies going to be? What are the actual savings that we're going to see from different policies? What are the trade-offs between different policy options that we might be looking at, and things of that nature. So still really trying to coordinate amongst the program managers as well as with sort of the working group to finalize the scope on this, but that's kind of, given everything I've got going on, that's like a next week problem. But we're really hoping to, get our RFQ out, hire a vendor for our initial research questions, and get some of that initial research completed, knowing that, we've got a lot of public facing activity starting up this fall, and we're gonna need to have our talking points in order.
A question, would this be for new buildings or only, or retrofitting existing buildings that's below the 50,000 square feet?
The research or the?
No, I'm saying as far as the implementation of these new rules.
Is it for new building? So
Is it for new builds going forward, or is it also for retrofitting?
it's for
existing
both,
buildings?
yeah. So the policies that we're pursuing are for both.
Okay.
So we know that, if we get everyone up on new codes, right, and we get everyone's updated codes, that'll address most of our new building and new construction savings. And then a lot of the other policies, so the policy work's is gonna split into those two camps. We'll be doing some new building policies, and then there's gonna be some work on those existing building policies, which is really, what we need to work on to get to, our big savings. So, we'll look into things like benchmarking and what, there's all sorts of equity implications and, administration and implementation, questions to answer about how would you set up a benchmarking policy? How would you administer that? How does that get us to our goals? And whether that's relative to, energy efficiency standards or emission standards, that's something that we're gonna be figuring out with this group, but it'll be probably an either or of like which one we as a group walk towards, informed by kind of conversations with the vendor, the experts in terms of legal implications and the challenges of the different pathways that will go down. So that's all TBD, but that's the heart of the work of the collaborative moving forward. All right, so next slide. So the oversight committee's role, well, we can go to the next slide. We're gonna be looking for support and feedback on, the jurisdictional awards. I previewed for you, I'm gonna be bringing that to you all hopefully next month, in terms of what the formula looks like, what that means, making sure that you all are comfortable with sort of the criteria and formula that we've developed and what that has, the distributive effect that has for our communities. We're looking for your feedback and insight on some of those research questions. We're all out there in the community hearing different things, hearing different talking points that are being raised in opposition to the work. I really want to hear what you think is the most important question for us to, hear back from you on what are the most important questions we have to answer for us to be able to succeed in our, as a program as a whole, as well as in our policy adoption and implementation. And then finally getting word out to our local jurisdictions. We've got a very good participation from a lot of our jurisdictions. We've had very minimal participation from some of our other jurisdictions, and we really do want to get as much participation from all of our jurisdictions as possible. And so, we're going to be in the process once the contract's done with the BPC facilitator of doing one-on-one outreach to every DRCOG jurisdiction to let them know about what the grant opportunity is, how much money they could potentially be getting, how we can support them in adopting these policies. But there's going to be that's coming from us, and we could always use the peer support and saying, hey, here's the other jurisdictions that have already signed up. Here's jurisdictions that have some of the same concerns you do about what it means to participate. Why don't you talk to them about how you're navigating that? And we're trying to design this grant in a way that, especially for our smaller jurisdictions, if you need to work with other communities, we want you to work with other communities. We want to encourage collaboration to address capacity constraints and things of that nature. So questions and comments. I guess we're opening up the floor to you all. Just wanted to get any feedback you all have with regards to sort of that initial jurisdictional award design. that I talked about in sort of the timeline I previewed for you all. You know, if any of you have participated in communities of practice or peer cohort networks, you know, we're in that process right now of really structuring, you know, what do the sub cohorts look like? How regularly do they have to meet? How much burden are we asking of staff time to participate? You know, what are the trade-offs in terms of our needs to communicate with each other and educate, but also not, you know, overburden folks. Obviously, questions around the research questions that we need to answer. You know, if you have any ideas to pass on to our consultants or partners. And finally, is there anything you'd like to hear from me with regards to this program in the future? That's all I got.
Thanks for the presentation.
I think it's taped.
I do have a few just sort of questions. One of the things that I'm thinking about in regard to both the jurisdictional awards as well as the peer support network is, are we doing any kind of assessment of where communities are at on different things? So like I think about Boulder, we just passed some new energy codes that include, for example, embodied carbon, which most places haven't started doing yet, right? But you know, I think about other things with regard to Boulder, like we're really trying on equity. It's still, I wouldn't say it's a strength of ours, right? So like how do we kind of set things up in a way that you know, the awards are sensitive to just different strengths that jurisdictions may have, and that also that kind of becomes valuable within the context of the peer network.
Yeah.
You know, well, Boulder's great for technical stuff, maybe this other community is good on something else, right?
Yeah, no, so I think that that's a great question. I think that you know, to begin with, there were a number of criteria that were identified with regards to, you know, to like how should we distribute the money throughout our region, and sort of how progressive or you know how much movement there's been at the local level was definitely identified as a potential criteria. And so we looked into things like, you know, how updated are your codes, you know, what type of stretch codes do you have, and I think the challenge with regards to how, like, you know, is do you want to incentivize or reward people for being really at the cutting edge, or do you want to incentivize people who are, you know, maybe on 2015 code, and, you know, would see the biggest gains in terms of adopting a new code and updating it. And, you know, so we did talk a lot about that. And I think one of the challenges that came up with regards to sort of accounting for that in terms of the award structure is that becomes a threshold kind of, when you do the math, basically it ends up being like, well, if you have a code, you get an extra $50,000, or if you don't have a code, you don't get that $50,000. And I think that it got a little messy for us from that perspective to really say, well, you know, especially when you actually looked at it as applied to some of the jurisdictions, our region obviously differs greatly between, you know, Denver versus our next jurisdiction, biggest jurisdiction, Aurora, versus like our lakesides of 17 people or 60 people and some of the other really small jurisdictions. But they have codes, right? And you know, if Lakeside's on a 2015 code, do you want to give them a $50,000, you know, baseline budget just for not having had that kind of code in place? And so we decided that great criteria in terms of the BPC, we want to accommodate everyone who's, you know, pushing the bounds. And, you know, I think Colin from Boulder County has been talking about it as sort of like the early adopters network. Like we want them to, you know, to support them in that space to continue to push in terms of what kind of regulations they're exploring, and also not really silo into just like, you know, well, everyone who's doing really, you know, ambitious stuff right now, like is not at all talking to, you know, some of those folks who are just doing a little stretch code adoption. So I think in terms of the pure network design, that will be like, I think we're intentionally going to try to continue the existing codes cohort and to some extent, you know, sort of pull that into our collaborative and allow them to continue to explore and kind of set in some ways the agenda of what the region's overall kind of, you know, the policy timeline looks like, right? You know, it's good to have leaders and it's good to have people walking together that way. And I think especially for that group, really want to make sure that they find that sort of arm in arm community as they're sometimes testing new regulatory or legal boundaries with regards to what they're passing. Meanwhile, you know, we'll still have space for them to communicate with our smaller local, you know, smaller jurisdictions that are, you know, going to be doing lessons learned. Like, what are the lessons learned that came from all these other groups, and you know, how can that inform their, you know, and ease their policy adoption. But yes, we can get into more the metrics. I think overall our guiding criteria in terms of the money distribution has been, you know, what gets us to our as a region goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions maximally. And so really knowing that, and I'll preview, I'll show, we can talk about this more at the next meeting, but there's a weighted criteria of residential buildings versus commercial, which is basically, if you look at our greenhouse gas inventory, a 2-to-3 ratio of sort of how much emissions those sectors account for, as well as then you know, our existing building profile versus projected growth, and sort of what the existing emissions are relative to the existing profile versus what the projected emissions are relative to future growth. And so we've tried to account for that in our formula, so that really that's the guiding principle for how we're distributing the money. And then the way we've set up sort of the award tiers. So roughly speaking, the recommendation is for a minimum floor of jurisdictions receiving $50,000, regardless of size, and a maximum award, a cap of $2.5 million, $2 to $2.5 million, based on that weight. So that sort of has the effect of narrowing kind of what the distribution would be otherwise. And, you know, otherwise Denver would get way more, and you know, some of the small jurisdictions would get absolutely nothing. And then we've identified sort of funding tiers really relative to what we think are the best eligible uses for, like, right now, working on this and like getting the policies passed that will, you know, get us to that point where we're seeing, you know, emissions reductions as soon as possible, right? So, you know, we've tried to structure that around, like, how many jurisdictions can we really try to get at least half FTE, if not full FTE, and you know, sort of went through a bunching exercise already of trying to make sure that we've got awards going out to jurisdictions that are usable amounts, that will make a real difference in their budgets to higher capacity to like adopt these policies and get us where we're going.
Got two more faster questions, I think. One is, or maybe less complex, sorry about it. Will anything in the sort of policy recommendations to get to zero emissions, does that include any embodied carbon accounting for new builds?
I don't believe that's really been part of the conversation to date. Or you can correct me if I'm wrong.
We discussed it in the overall building policy collaborative, the one that exists right now for the Metro Denver, and there's opportunity to include it, but it hasn't been a conversation yet because it hasn't really started yet.
Okay,
But it is in the existing conversation piece.
Okay, cool. So something that folks will be talking about.
I think so. I mean, I think in terms of, you know, in terms of what the overall roadmap looks like, you know, I think embodied carbon will be a, you know, 5-year down the road kind of policy goal, you know, to the extent that we get there, but it is part of the, you know, we will create space for that conversation. And then I think our goal really by the end of this year is to have kind of gone through, or maybe by early next year, gone through with all of our jurisdictions, kind of what the full policy suite looks like. Kind of what do those policies do for you relative to our like greenhouse gas emissions? And then what's the right timeline, or even not, if not timeline, sort of the right sequence for the jurisdictions to start pursuing these. You know, what's the biggest win now relative to the lowest risk? You know, we'll identify the right, you know, come up with the right sort of policy analysis profile, and then ideally have basically everyone endorse, okay, here as a region, here are the 5 primary policies we're going to be pursuing over the next 5 years, and here's kind of the right sequence for us to go through them. that doesn't mean everyone's doing it exactly the same time, it doesn't mean everyone's doing all of them at once or anything like that, but I think that that's the right type of consensus for us to be building towards, and I think that, embodied carbon could be part of that.
Thank you. And then last question, is there anything we can do to draw down the money earlier than this fall, or are we sort of left?
So I
Just
mean,
from a practical.
yeah, I will say, I think, as we're trying to get it drawn down ASAP. It is a reimbursement grant, so that is obviously part of our constraint too. It's gonna take us 2 months just in terms of the way that we've structured our grant and approval process internally, just to walk this through, and get approval of the policy essentially, from this group, from the full DRCOG board. So that's why I'm trying to get this, that's why we're in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks coming right back to you all with like what this looks like. And then I think that what I've proposed, if you all see the workshop on Monday, grant opens July 1st. Ideally, we've got 2 eligible uses that should be really easy plug and play types of options. You're gonna hire staff, or you're gonna like do and or do some staff training on that they need. If the budget items and sort of the grant application we're trying to structure to be super easy for that, and having like an accelerated rolling review process for that. So if you're gonna just do one of the, if you're gonna take your say $600,000 and you're just gonna do one of those 2 options, we will review it and approve it within like 2 weeks, and we'll start contracting with you. And we know that that's gonna take, that may have to go up to city council to get approved, and there's gonna be just timeline delays in terms of what the local contracting process looks like. But our goal is to give that option, so that we can, start drawing down as soon as possible. And if everything worked perfectly, that could get us to having a full signed agreement with jurisdictions by early September. And ideally, if we give everyone what their prospective budget looks like, their total allotment looks like now, we can start, there can be some parallel processes that will need to happen where, local jurisdictions are starting their hiring and, their budgeting process, and they can start a hiring process so that they have someone on board when the grant is fully signed.
Thank you. And yeah, I would just add, if there's any stage of the process that this group's frequency of meeting is sort of holding back, I hope, if I can speak for everybody, but for me, I would really love for us to know that, so we can just consider ways to help.
Great.
So, thank you for
Steve,
answering questions. Some of these, was gonna ask have been answered. On this local, on the international building code, what's the goal to the measurement to get us up? So I think right now we're at 2021, some of the cities are.
Mhm.
So what are we trying to achieve and get at? So we're all kind of an even playing field and using this grant money in order to do that, because that's gonna take staff and all that,
Mhm.
understand that. So what's the ultimate goal to get us at a certain policy goal?
So the ultimate goal is to be above state minimum, because we have new state minimum coming in. And we also have, so we've got our 2024 code cycle and the 2027. So we're gonna hit 2027 mid-cycle for our grant. So our goal is to get everyone up to the most up-to-date code cycle, which is gonna be that at that point. Obviously that hasn't been, we don't know what that's fully gonna look like yet. So I think initial steps are gonna be, the existing codes cohort has basically got a 2024 plus codes package in terms of the extra the amendments and whatnot that are are being made available. We'd love to use that kind of as our baseline, and then once we get once 27 comes out, we can figure a feeling for what that looks like. I can imagine that we would then spend time as a cohort figuring out, okay, how are we gonna all update towards that? What are the what are the amendments that we want to have for our jurisdictions at that point? And I think that's it takes a lot of staff time to do that. I'm hoping that what we can do with our vendor is make sure that codes package is consistent and is ready for everyone to pick out all the amendments that they want relative to that, and then be able to bring that and run that through their local adoption process.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi.
So I'm glad that, first of all, Chris is in the room.
Hi, Richard.
My question will take us back to the last time we met. On slide 7, I think you had community engagement. What some of the cities would like to use some money for.
Mhm.
And then I noticed that the Sokol contract also has 4 million dedicated to community engagement. So I want to make sure that we're not having redundancy or overlap. I wonder if you two or Robert could speak to that. You know, obviously when we're cross silo collaboration, we don't want redundant, a duplicative work occurring.
Right,
Yeah.
So can you explain that?
that's a really good question.
Yeah, I can take a first crack.
Please do.
So what I've been thinking about, so we are in the process of, you know, so before the grant goes live, like we will have finalized what the eligible uses look like. So I think we've got a little bit of runway to continue to narrow, and that is, I've got in my draft package, I've got, you know, a bunch of different cross-reference with Clay about, you know, some of the trainings, or cross-reference with CEO about what training CEO is offering. And so we're gonna be doing that exercise in the next couple of weeks to make sure we're not allowing for duplicative efforts and we're directing people to the right grant for the right matter. I do, based on sort of my, and Chris, you can hop in, but based on sort of, you know, I think a lot of the community engagement contract is gonna be awarded and administered through the sub-grant opportunity to the CBOs. And when I think about that from a, you know, what do our jurisdictions need versus like what are the CBOs doing? I could see there being a need for, you know, local jurisdictions to be doing their own outreach in coordination with the CBOs. And, you know, one thing that we're probably, you know, I would probably recommend is that we put a cap and on what the local community engagement uses are, you know, up to $50,000 to support, you know, basically staff-led or, you know, jurisdiction-led community engagement efforts. Because, you know, they do need to coordinate with the CBO. You know, if we have 20 to 40 CBOs out there that have their own budget, you know, there's still gonna be some need for jurisdictions to do some things on their own. There's still gonna be some need for them to coordinate to make sure that the CBOs are, you know, coordinate with CBO activity in their jurisdiction. So I don't, you know, we're still figuring out exactly what that the community engagement sub-awards look like, and you know, I don't know if we've defined what the budget looks like for, like, if you're a CBO that, you know, has a presence in 5 jurisdictions, how you're supposed to spend all that money. But very cognizant of that concern, and we are, I think, the program managers are all, and as we're defining our grant criteria, going through that exercise of like, hey, let's make sure that I'm not, you know, funding anything that you're already funding.
Yeah, I came to that epiphany, I think 2 weeks ago. You presented our draft climate action plan. And so there's also community engagement in there. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Are there hooks and loops so that they can all connect to each other, so that again, it's like you're not recreating the wheel locally, when actually we have a very high powered firm that's gonna be doing all the branding, marketing, and messaging, and stuff like that, that then the cities can just kind of, you know, build off of to be more effective and also have consistent messaging across the region.
Yeah, and just, I would add too, if I could, that we are constantly internally discussing the need for a lot of coordination from the vendor standpoint too, because they're gonna be instrumental in helping us stand up these granting opportunities. And the left hand needs to know what the right is doing constantly. So that's just a big part of the conversations internally, but also these firms that we're bringing on board are well aware of the need for just a lot of meetings, and with, you know, a strict cadence, and we're keeping everybody in the loop. Feedback loop, super important, and just because this can't be siloed. I mean, that's another thing that we talk about constantly in this program. And it's not just internal, it extends to the vendors. It's if we remain siloed, what you just are afraid of, it's gonna happen. So that's job one for us, it's just that constant coordination. But
good.
yeah, thanks.
It's okay. Anyone else have questions?
I'm just gonna ask, like, the March 17th, this workshop, or are we part of that workshop as well, or is that
If
internal?
you wanna be, I'm happy to extend the invite. I think we have an existing group of participants, but it's open. This is not the workshop is not intended to, I don't know actually even how the workshop participants were first.
Yeah, I mean, we would love your help recruiting more folks. We've been, it's a tricky thing to get certain jurisdictions to show up for these things. So any and all are welcome. And if you can help us in broadcasting it and getting more attendance, that'd be great. Especially those that have not participated yet. This is a really important meeting to kind of define what this is going to look like.
Yeah, and it's gonna be the first time each jurisdiction will have a dollar amount of here's what you should be, at least, an initial range of what you should be expecting to receive.
Do we have that information? So we can talk to a few of the jury. I don't have that, so how would I?
I'm planning on sending that out today.
Okay.
To the workshop attendees or prior workshop attendees, and I can make sure that we share that with this group. And that's gonna be basically our discussion line item for April, so I don't think there'd be a problem with sharing that with this group as well.
Is that a daytime? Would that be a daytime?
It is, it's from 1 to 3:30 on the Monday.
Sorry, no, I'm just.
If you do need help in having us reach out to some of the member municipalities or constituents, like if that is helpful to you, I think you're more than welcome to kind of assign us folks to like touch base with, especially if they're neighboring jurisdictions, relevant counties, et cetera.
Yeah, all right, great. I will expect to see more communication.
I have a couple of questions on the grant distribution kind of framework, but anyone else have any other questions for Greg before I start diving into mine? So you probably have, I think, one of the hardest kind of distributions to get off the ground because it really depends on all us member jurisdictions adopting, seeing the same vision and moving forward simultaneously. And that is, in my experience, not the way that most municipalities do things, right? But color me shocked. But I kind of want to maybe even just open it up for discussion or just kind of hear your thoughts. Obviously, some communities are going to be slower to adopt or want more information or want more proof of concept prior to essentially hiring somebody based on grant funds, for which, quite frankly, they may be feeling uncertainty right now. Like that's just the reality. And so I'm wondering, are we going to hold in reserve the funds that certain jurisdictions do not use and then open up like a second round, say like 6 or 9 months or something like that to give folks maybe more time to process or come to this point?
So that is exactly the structure, so that we have, and I probably breezed over it, but yes, we've intentionally, especially also given sort of the structure of our grant, this isn't a block grant, we can't just pre-allocate all the money.
Right.
So we do need to have a structure for a drawdown of any remainder for non-participating jurisdictions. So there is intended to be a second grant round for which is, I'm hoping will likely, given our timeline and structure of the grant, we need to do that next year essentially. So that will launch spring to summer of 2026 for redistribution of all unallocated funds. So essentially what our first round does is it says, we're trying to front load eligibility, and it says, we would love everyone to sign up right now, and if everyone signs up, takes their full allotment as allowed by the formula, we would spend 34.5 of our $35 million, right? And then we'd have just a little bit left over, but we know that that's not fully going to be the case. I'm anticipating we'll get maybe hopefully in the 30s of our jurisdictions. We get 30 jurisdictions to take round 1. We'll still have a lot of that leftover money. That money is going to be, what's left over will be relative to which jurisdictions did not take that money. And then I think, we're still in the process of determining the grant criteria, but the idea would be that we would make it a competitive grant right now for the second round, pool all of that money, But if you were a jurisdiction that did not participate in round one, that would be a high scoring criteria for what your allotment could be from the competitive grant route. So I would not guarantee, but I would say that the value would be basically if you didn't participate in round one and you came for round two, at minimum, you should ideally be getting whatever you are pre-allotted it for in round one.
Fantastic. You know, things we can do for, I guess, the community, the jurisdictions that have just less technical public works staff capacity in order to do this kind of stuff. Have we thought about any sort of like pooled hiring or job opportunity posting kind of stuff so that jurisdictions can have the same kind of well of resources instead of, honestly, like that's potentially 30 new positions being hired, which all have kind of the similar job description.
Yes, we've talked a lot about that. So yes, we have sort of two options that I think we're trying to build into the grant right now for that. One is to, we've heard from some jurisdictions that have strong regional collaboration already, that they are interested in joint positions, shared position between, different jurisdictions. And we've tried to structure the awards so that, two jurisdictions are getting $300,000. Okay, that adds up to $600,000. That's one FTE. It's between two people, so that the awards can add up and sum to what we've budgeted for an FTE. And obviously that would require them to enter into some intergovernmental agreement in terms of how they're going to share and what share they get of those services. But that's one option that we've created. The second, especially for the smallest jurisdictions, who are probably on contract building departments anyways, is to utilize that money for contracted services. So either they can, as long as those services are fulfilling the goal of what we're trying to do in terms of the policy adoption and implementation, they could contract for those services from some of the firms out there that are already providing that, or to the extent that they want to try to pool for a specific, like a more specified service from a separate vendor. We're thinking of creating an option where basically DRCOG would run a group procurement and administer that contract on behalf of those jurisdictions.
That was going to be where I was going with that next, is that if there's any way we can do some sort of consolidated contracting or helping with the recruitment on this side of things, again, especially for those smaller jurisdictions, I think would make a big difference in getting not only the award out faster, but getting boots on the ground.
Yeah, so we're still ironing out the logistics on what that means from a grant administration perspective. But I mean, essentially what I thought I had earlier is what I wanted to mention in terms of kind of our timeline is, like, if you come to us in July and you hire an FTE, like, we'll get you that money. But we are just gonna have, I think, a hard close on the grant for round one. And then, we will do some of that grant review and evaluation of, like, how many overlapping activities has everyone identified that they want to do, and what can we do to, and give ourselves some time to do some coordination to make sure that, we can, leverage people or suggest people enter into some group contracting if that would work. Or at that point, that's when we would evaluate, okay, how many of you are, electing into, like, we just want a group procurement, like, we just want to spend our $50,000 through a DRCOG, contract, and, have on-call service for some specified allowed use.
Last thing I can think of is, thank you for considering that round two for kind of that later stage of adoption and spending out those funds. If, there are obviously going to be jurisdictions and municipalities that don't have the capacity to really think about their participation at this stage, or quite frankly, may just not want to, right? And I think between rounds 1 and 2 is kind of the opportune time for, this is planning longer out for this year. But in between, if you're finding communities that just need extra information, or they want to talk to a peer or see how, Lakewood is doing it, or how, whoever, Aurora is doing it, again, reach out. That is a good time to reach out to us to say, hey, we can send a contingent of our environmental, professionals or public works directors over to you and do a brunch or whatever and talk to you about the benefits of the program.
Yeah. A great idea, I think, love it, we plan on, it's really look forward to having a second crack at doing recruitment. So I think spring of next year is really the right time. We'll have the collaborative up and running, we can have, make it open for people to drop into meetings if they just wanna audit them and they're not a participating, jurisdiction yet, and, do that second round of recruitment for, communities that are on the fence about whether or not they wanna go on second round.
Actually, that was a really great point about just continuing to invite them to the peer network, even if they haven't, been submitted a grant application, just to say, drop in, see what's happening, see if that's something you'd like to do. That might be the speed that folks might wanna move.
Yeah, and we may end up to be determined in terms of sort of what's open to people within our jurisdictional bounds and outside. But for example, we know that the existing codes cohort has some jurisdictions, like I think Fort Collins has been participating in that, and others that, we don't want to, we want to move the region and and help support move the state. So, we're definitely, we may not be able to give money to those jurisdictions, but, as long as it doesn't muck up things, I can't see a reason why we would, keep people out of the meeting spaces, which are really so valuable for, the mountains cohorts that are going on, or the other communities that are exploring these opportunities.
Thanks, Greg.
Have you connected in with the Colorado chapter of the ICC?
I don't know.
So there's a Colorado chapter of the International Codes Council.
I imagine, yeah.
And that would be, okay, so just want, because that would, if you haven't presented, that's obviously a group to the point of how you get some of those boots on the ground folks to understand what's going on.
I know some of our vendors are like leaders within the Colorado ICC, but I don't actually know what so I know that we have access to people who are in those spaces. I don't know what our communication up to the chapters, but no, so I can check in on that.
Yeah, because I think some of these presentations, to your point, is it's great, to get some of it's those other groups like FOMA, like NAIOP, like the apartment because the apartment association, there's an apartment association everywhere, right? And beyond down from there. And so I think sometimes when it comes to these conversations, the business community sometimes is left out, and I'm not saying it's, purposeful or anything, but the environmental groups are engaged because that's their world where, my members are over here trying to run their buildings every day, and so they don't always hear that stuff, but they've got a lot of input and all of that. So I think, ICC chapter and AGC and some of those groups, and that's something where I can be beneficial. So, lean on me if you need, there's the Colorado Real Estate Alliance that we meet once a month. So if we need to do a presentation, and I was thinking it might be good for you to come do a presentation for everybody to understand what's being, coming into the communities that they've got members who are working in, so that they understand what's coming, so that they can have the opportunity to engage. Because, like the Lakewood one, I just happened to find out about it because I'm fortunate that I have somebody that's got their ear to the ground, and we were able to engage with them and participate. So
yeah, couldn't agree more. I think policies never succeed when people are caught by surprise. No one likes being taken by surprise. So the more we can access these spaces and have, constructive dialogue and communication with all of the, stakeholders, the better. So I'll definitely follow up with you on that.
I'm glad we ran over last time, so Greg, you get the spot. Especially since we are ramping up and getting to really important decisions and conversations coming the next couple of months in terms of actually deciding what's going where. And I think so I almost wish we would just show the spreadsheet right now. It's not quite ready until this afternoon, apparently. But I want to stress that, in my opinion, I think all of us that have been working on it, it's really meaningful dollars based on the size of your jurisdiction, right? Like a lot of our jurisdictions are very small. So we were talking about 58, but 20 to 30 of them are really quite small. And so that means that bigger piece of the pie are going to like your cities, those of you that are in the room. And to the point where I hope that it's pretty hard for these jurisdictions to look $1.5 million and say, no, we're not going to participate in this program when it's a $1.5 million. I mean, well, we'll see when we get there.
That's the hope.
That's the hope, yep. The other thing I wanted to mention was that, to your point, Director Barr, that we are really hoping for creative partnerships and pooling of these funds. We're not super excited about 58 individual contracts with the jurisdictions. So if there's ways that, maybe a county wants to take on pooling a bunch of their jurisdictions funds into a pot that serves all of them individually, and or DRCOG can help facilitate any of that, we are very interested in doing that to simplify this work for everyone. And then finally, Greg alluded to this last month, but 95% of our emissions are coming from this program. Emission reductions are coming from this program. This is the most important thing. That the rest of these programs are kind of ground proofing, like we are approving boots on the ground, getting these industries started up, communicating to the public that this is a good thing. The benefits come from the emission reduction. So I'll just because it's important to mention, I think, are from the same grant, CPRG, the Northeast Coalition of States got $450 million, but they're only claiming about a 10th, or is it 100th of the emission reduction as we are with half the money, because they're not addressing policy. And so this is a really important part of this program, really important for our ultimate goal, which is reducing climate pollution. So,
there was recent EPA, we're gonna take away 31 rulings. And so, because anything's possible from the new administration. And then the money was awarded, and I heard you say about reimbursement. So who's paying, or is DRCOG paying this up front, and then we're applying to get reimbursed for that pot of money?
So everything's reimbursement, right? So basically what would happen with a city's hired staff under this money, it will be reimbursement. So you'll send us an invoice every month.
So DRCOG has the money?
No. We're also, so you send us an invoice, we send EPA an invoice, they pay us, we pay you.
All right, because I was just with DC and we were there since last Tuesday up until this week, and asked a lot of questions. And then we asked about 2024 congressional spending for 2024, 2025. They said that, nope, you gotta start over, you gotta reapply.
Yeah, for 2026, yeah.
So I'm hoping that that's not what we're running up against.
No, well, not yet. I mean, we don't know, to be honest with you, Mayor. I think, here's the thing, I think what you're referring to primarily, I think it was a discretionary grant.
I think it was a combination, there's Christie grants, all kinds of grants.
Right.
And we're awarded in that pipeline, and they're trying to take everything, trying to claw back everything.
Right, but there was no grant agreements in place for those monies.
Oh, those are grants, those were.
But did you have a grant agreement in place?
Yes. Oh, yeah, we had grant agreements in place, and they said they put that in a pipeline, and some things got through. Like credits for electrification, but as far as other commitments,
right?
They said,
Yeah.
no, we're stopping
That's true.
everything.
Yeah. Well, here's what we know.
Yep.
Right, with regards to this, is that, the payment portals, what I refer to it as, basically has been open for over 3 weeks now. So we have not had any issues with getting reimbursement. And this is more unique for us than typical, because we're direct recipients. Typically, we go through CDOT or, State Unit on Aging or something like that to get reimbursed. But this one, and if we were to submit an invoice this morning, it's likely we'll get that money this afternoon, at latest tomorrow.
Are you referring to ASAP?
Yes.
Oh, it's working for you? Oh,
Yeah.
we're having some issues with it too.
Shh, don't tell anybody. But we're also getting indication,
Right.
at least from our National Association of Regional Councils, that there are some regions in the country that have just straight up given the go-ahead to move forward with the carbon reduction pollution grant program. So we have not received that specifically from Region 8, but they never ever told us, they have, staff have told us to proceed. As we were moving, right? So, we're good until we're not.
Yeah. We look to be in contact with EPA still. Our project officer is speaking with us, which is good. She's kind of as confused as everybody, kind of waiting for more guidance. I think at some point we're probably expecting some form of conversation about rescoping. But for now, we're just fulfilling the terms of our grant and marching ahead.
That's right.
Believe me, it's very frustrating to be in this position and talking about this instead of this awesome stuff that, you know, we applied for and were awarded and plan on implementing.
This really seems like it's gonna be great for Colorado and where we're, because we have so many different constraints than other states do, as far as regulations. We all have been abiding by that, right? And then these goals keep getting moved either up or back, right? So we have to adjust that. And you're talking about cities, and we're a really growing city. And then when it comes down to implementing these building codes, it comes down to the contractors actually doing the work. Because when those buildings are built, whether it's apartment or a house, that contractor has to go out and purchase that. They have to abide by that as well. And there's no reimbursement from the companies who are asking them to do the work. So I talked to these contractors like, oh man, this is just, you know, international code update. We have to pay out of our pocket to do that. So.
I also want to acknowledge too that I think part of our role as this oversight board is addressing exactly this. Like, you know, there is, you know, at times of uncertainty, there is significant risk, you know, to DRCOG in terms of how much financial outlay, our subgrantees, their reimbursement, our obligations to all the community-based organizations that we sign agreements with. And I think, you know, this is something we're gonna take this next hour to kind of talk about on a monthly basis in order for us as a body to work with staff to say, what are the things that we would like to see in terms of ensuring that that risk is able to be mitigated in circumstances where there is uncertainty. And, you know, we're hearing payment portal is working currently and that's fantastic. But what are the other things that, and I think we're gonna get into this, I do wanna acknowledge Ron had his hand up, but no, it's okay. But I think we should, you know, as a board lay out, what are the things that we would like to see from staff on a monthly basis in terms of financial outlays, sub-grant agreements, staffing, those are the three things that came to top of my mind.
Sure.
But what are other things that folks would like to see kind of on a regular basis in order that we can manage that risk? Before we do that, Ron, I did see your hand up at one point.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. You kind of moved on. I just got back from Washington DC last night and from being there since Monday, and I think you all got to it, but we're monitoring very closely what's happening. And I think after some of the meetings I had, feeling much better about the state of affairs for this grant program.
Tell us more.
Yeah.
Came back from
Wait,
DC,
Todd.
felt
And
much better.
just to the point,
That's-
there are differences between the way grants were awarded, the types of grants, the department that the grants are being awarded, and the actual statutory funding source for the grant program. So there's lots of nuance, and you can't sort of hear something about one grant and sort of apply that to a different grant.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ron. All right, so what we have up next is Robert's gonna kind of walk through just a quick program guidance and strategy presentation, and hopefully then we kind of move on, Steve, to your questions about like, how are we thinking about managing that risk, and what do the next 6 months to a year look like in terms of our responsibilities to DRCOG and this program, so.
Awesome, thanks. So slide. We are really just, we didn't have much time to kind of have a conversation about what we presented last time. So we want to go through each program. We'll just sit around the table here, I think, if that's all right with you, and really feel free to ask any questions about anything. But we put up some just kind of guiding questions on the slide. So I'll start with just a kind of general program update that we kind of covered the funding situation. I think, you know, to put it, what does make it maybe a little different is that it is part of a law, the Inflation Reduction Act, which theoretically would have to be revoked by Congress or changed by Congress. We've even seen our friends with the greenhouse gas reduction fund when the $20 billion kind of being pulled back there, but you know, it's probably illegal, so we're at least not at the bleeding edge of this thing, right? Like they're gonna be fighting that battle there. The other kind of interesting part of that was that I think EPA recognized they can't just pull that money back and make it go away. They're already talking about how to reallocate it. So I don't, and they're all non-governmental agencies. I think we are a trusted governmental agency, but again, we do anticipate at some point probably to have a hard conversation with EPA once they get some guidance. As far as like kind of our risk, we are all internally having initial conversations about that. Whether, you know, right now we're billing monthly to EPA. And regardless of an existential threat or not, that was never gonna work at the height of this program, and we're kind of outlaying millions and millions of dollars every month. DRCOG can never afford that, so we're figuring out kind of, do we need to increase our cadence, change staffing under this program so that we are billing monthly, or the second a bill comes in, we are, a big bill especially, we are doing everything we can to get that audited and submitted to EPA so that our exposure is as small as possible. Did you, sorry.
Yeah, I got a lot in my head.
All right.
I wonder, is there an option for advanced payments?
Unfortunately not.
There is no option there either?
Great question. We even, especially the incentive portion, when we're really like churning through a bunch of money, we worked with EPA prior to the Trump administration just to figure out if there's a way we could just have a floating pot of money to just help cover that. So nobody's kind of, otherwise the money costs us money, right? If even the vendor has a kind of rotating pot of $500,000 out there, they're paying interest on that or something. So no, unfortunately. What else to say about that? Well, aside from all that negative stuff, actually, go ahead, please.
And
I'm just thinking again in my head. I'm just thinking of just creative ways that,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, community, I mean, this is gonna be great for us, but I'm just thinking about grassroots organizations that are going to apply for this, and it's devastating.
Yeah.
You know, even for us, we're recipients of an EPA grant now, and you know, they're not gonna share much, you know, they're only gonna share hardly anything. And it's sometimes, as I think, and I talk to other CEOs, it's a blow to them. So just trying to think of ways that we can get creative in this committee of how this could work, but it's kind of like day by day almost.
I think to our benefit, and you know, we don't know what's gonna happen here, but this first 6 months of the program is really about design. Our expenditures are not that high, especially relative to what they're going to be later. So just really, 6 months is kind of a long time, and the way how fast things are moving right now, I hope we get some guidance before we really start to get commitments and make promises to folks out there in terms of the money we're gonna put out there.
One suggestion is that we do have to be transparent.
Yeah.
You know, we have to let community know, especially when they hear the name DRCOG, they think that is, because some of them won't, they won't know this. So I do think it's gonna be important that we at least, and I wish we had that, and I think because we were directly working with EPA, we had that, but I just think as a sub-recipient that we have to give them the 411. I mean, not explicitly, but at least give them some idea of this is as a possibility. That's just for them to also think. And I think sometimes it also may be helpful to get some ideas for them too, you know, because they may, you know, $50,000 may not be a lot, but you know, an organization that may have only about $500 in operating budget, it may be something, you know, and because I think about also as a community member, and also think as an ED, is that when you promise the community something, we're that bridge, and sometimes we get the blow and the government won't, you know? So I think it's gonna be important that we consider that, because I just wouldn't want to go and have them apply for something that we may not be sure. And obviously we're gonna do it. It sounds like it's been working on ASAP.gov, but I just know for us, communities are gonna, either they trust or they don't. And right now they're not trusting. Even when if I say DRCOG right now, absolutely not. So I think it's gonna be important that CBOs have us as oversight committee to be that bridge to let them know what's up. So then that way they can be more excited coming in, but also know that this is a possibility that these things may happen. But it sounds like things are actually in motion now. So this is actually really good news. It's just that time of uncertainty that we just have to make sure that we're transparent on our end to support them. So important.
I mean, I'll just say that we're having a lot of the same heartburn about hiring folks right now, right?
Yeah.
So Doug's had more heartburn than probably anybody justly, but we're we're having to have really hard conversations with our candidates. We've lost a candidate, our vendors are nervous. It's just the situation, but we're gonna do this thing still. Until somebody tells us not to.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just, well, I mean, really, you said like 95% what I want to say, so thank you. And I was just gonna say, you know, to the point that you were making around bringing folks together, I mean, I think this transparency is really important, but also getting solutions from people, right, who are there, the businesses that we are going to be interested in, like, I mean, maybe as a way to start using up just a little bit of the money, like actually paying them to kind of come together, like help us figure out a contingency plan for you. So if everything falls apart, you know, tomorrow, after we've kind of, you know, made some commitments that I don't mean like literally tomorrow, in 6 months, whatever. Then, you know, we've been informed by the groups that are gonna be most impacted, what it is that we can do to be helpful in that situation. And as we're doing the work, what's the work that we can do that it kind of gets things moving, you know, as much as we can, so that if something falls back, I think maybe just share your darker perspective on like the what we're facing and how quickly money can go away.
You know, one thing I will say that is great is that contractors understand what's happening, and for us, like we're doing the air monitoring project, obviously it's in Aurora, so we are trying to fight with them to try to get the site set up. But one thing that's really exciting is that we are contracted with Harvard to do the work with us, and they understand this isn't new news of what's going on, and we already brainstormed because we had received, I'm sure we had received an email saying that ASAP.gov was frozen, and you know, this was what, a month ago, and then the same day we had the meeting. The meeting went very well with us and the contractor, and we had already started brainstorming on what we were gonna do, because I think it was about $500,000, $600,000. But the contractor, Harvard, was already open to still doing the project, because I think it boils down to, do you believe in the work, you know? And I think it didn't stop us, it also didn't stop them. And I think that's some good news, is that even though this could or is uncertain, I think it's important that we continue to encourage our community, because it is gonna boil down, because when you think about nonprofits, especially grassroots, they don't have a lot of money, so they're really doing this for free. And they just more than likely just started getting money. So it's not really a big deal, because for us, when we got that email, we were like, okay, well, we're just gonna find a way to come up with the money on our own, and we did. And then right after the meeting with Harvard, we get another email saying that it was unlocked, unfrozen, you know, but we were already thinking about ways to get creative. So I think this is still great, and regardless of that, we still have to keep pushing and helping nonprofit organizations to do the work, that this stuff still needs to happen regardless who's in administration, because we were doing it when Trump was in office in 2016, you know? So I think that's gonna be really important, that when we do have those conversations, that we still come up with those solutions, because that's gonna light the fire for them to do the work. Because at the end of the day, we still need to reduce the carbon emissions. These are things that are gonna be important regardless of who's here.
I'll say we are pursuing a lot of avenues for contingency options here.
That's awesome.
I mean, we have a lot of creativity amongst this team. A lot of folks that want to keep their jobs. There's no more better like.
It's a very mercenary motivation, but.
I mean, look, this is the coolest thing I've been a part of. This whole regional collaboration thing has been bonkers. The amount of creativity and brain trust that has gone into this thing. It's just too good to have it go away. And I think we are, I think there's others in this region that recognize this. There are jurisdictions that have deep pockets that are, you know, already committed to supporting us in some ways. So we're thinking about it creatively, but we're also thinking about looking at other grant opportunities, utility dollars, other options to keep this thing going. So fingers crossed. I lost half my audience.
Just two.
Nothing personal.
I guess I want to get to the important stuff. Please feel free, if we plan to come with you with our upcoming meetings. I think you're seeing like already some kind of big decisions rolling your way. We met on Monday, half-day workshop, and kind of Gantt charted out some of these important decisions that are coming up. That'll lead to the kind of project launch somewhere around October. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made before then. And they'll be talking about those in a second. Beyond those and kind of like the cadence of like us bringing for discussion these kind of complicated funding decisions to you, and then coming back the next month for hopefully adoption, taking into account your feedback. That's going to be happening to a lot of the money that's going out the door this first year from the CDOs that are going to be awarded funds, the jurisdictions that are going to be awarded funds, the innovation program, $6 million of grants to the private sector, public sector, nonprofit orgs. So a lot of kind of meaty decisions about that'll be coming to you over this summer and into the fall here. But if there's anything we're missing, sorry, I should also mention, we'll be bringing you, as our vendors come up with branding, for example, we'll be bringing that to you to get your feedback. As Clay's program gets, we'll just be talking about our metrics and KPIs throughout this program, as well as budget. So, but if there's anything we're missing, anything you'd like to see on an agenda, you are more than welcome to email any of these program managers or myself. And with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think the cadence of this is going to be each program manager is going to talk a little bit, just remind you about their program and just solicit some more feedback since we didn't get the feedback last month. So.
So again, I'm Chris Selk, Program Manager for Communications for Building Decarbonization. I'm going to just very briefly refresh your memories as to what I talked about at our first meeting. And because, as Robert mentioned, we kind of ran out of time when we start up these committees, there's so much that needs to happen in those first couple meetings. I just wanted to give folks an opportunity to ask any questions of me that you might have. And Richard, I'm talking directly to you because I know you're going to have some questions for me, so get them ready. So, and a few updates too since the last time we met. I think I mentioned at the first meeting that we had selected Sukol Advertising and Design as our vendor for the communications contract, which that is a $14 million contract. The remaining $1 million is for the website developer, which we also have chosen since our last meeting. I am in the final stages of contract negotiations with Sukol. I am expecting to have that completed next week. That enables us to get going on the really good juicy stuff, which is the first day one meeting, they call it, that we have with them to start talking about our challenges, our goals, program objectives. I'm already supplying with them with a ton of literature and research that we've already done on our end so they can come prepared to this meeting. It's a full day, we'll all be there. And hopefully by the time we leave, they are gonna have a very robust idea of what we expect to see from them and plans moving forward. That's gonna lead them directly into brand development because they can't start to create that without that discovery phase. So that's going to include focus groups and dyads, which I learned are one-on-one meetings that they're gonna have with prime stakeholders. Also out of that day one meeting, the seeds of the campaign, the overall campaign are gonna come from that, which we're super excited about. And then this contract also includes advertising buys and public relations strategy. Because we are getting all of this funding from the EPA, we need to make sure that we have a robust communications and community engagement plan to present to them as part of our reporting. So Sukol will be responsible for authoring that overarching comms plan as well, so we can be compliant. Robert was actually kind of in charge of the selection of ImageX. I don't know if you want to talk about them briefly or anything to say on that.
They are a very capable and international firm that can build this thing for us really quickly, I think. And also, like, we're going to have policy decisions that need to be translated into web development really quickly, and they're very capable of doing that for us. So excited. We're going to have 4 agenda items for finance and budget, 4 vendor selections on Wednesday. So Director Kondo, thanks for allowing us to fill up your agenda there.
And then also, and kind of just to reiterate how important it is for all of our vendors to be working together, Sukol is going to play a key role in making sure that that website adheres to brand standards, consistent messaging, et cetera. So there's going to be a lot of interplay between ImageX and Sukel when it comes to the website creation and design. And then something that I remain very excited about, and Mara is going to be part of this too. Sukel's going to create what they call content toolkits for all of our stakeholders. So part of their scope of work will be 1 to 2 webinars for all of the comms and outreach folks in the DRCOG region who've been so supportive up to this point of helping us stand up this grant. But it's really important that our partners can help us push out messaging on socials, on websites, everything down to fact sheets and FAQs. So Sukel will also help us push that out to make sure that we're all singing from the same choir book. Very important on this. Okay. And then the second, I guess, sphere of responsibility that I have on the program is community engagement. That's a $4 million contract, and just a quick reminder, 2.2 million of that going directly back to CBOs in the form of pass-through grants. I already had a great meeting with Dr. Walker Ravenel about that. Really good continuing conversations about that. It's really important that we identify CBOs who would be good applicants for this program. Got so many great ideas from the doctor on that, and really excited about this moving forward. As I mentioned the first time I talked with you all, historically CBOs have always done this work. They're just never compensated for it. And it's really important that we right size that approach. This is an emerging best practice in the realm of public involvement. And I am just so excited that this is a major, and it's not a check the box exercise. It's a significant, authentic part of our engagement program. And I'm so thrilled that we have this planned. Another, I guess, big update on this is that we have selected the vendor. That's going to be going to our F&B next week as well. We chose HDR to help us lead the community engagement on this. Some of you might kind of wonder, why is an engineering consultant helping you with community engagement? HDR is a global consulting firm. They've got very strong community engagement chops. In the last couple of years, they have kind of downsized their CE approach in many of their North American offices, and Denver is one of the ones that they've really focused a lot of staff and project pursuits on. So we were incredibly impressed in the interview process with their team, their multicultural approach, particularly their experience standing up granting frameworks. And they have very strong ties locally to the CBOs that we need to make sure that we are in contact with and can get on board for this granting process. So from you folks, I would love particularly any tips, feedback that you can give regarding CBOs. I know that each of you represent a wide variety of demographics, communities. You're our boots on the ground with this. I would love any information, anybody I can meet with that you think it would be beneficial. I would love it. I would embrace that, welcome it. So please feel free to pass that information on to me. If you feel there's a strong CBO that you know of that could be a good fit for us for a community engagement standpoint. And then of course, always welcome to listening to ideas that you guys have for what you want to hear from me regarding comms and community engagement on the program. I say this all the time. I think that communications and CE is the soil that this program grows in. It touches every aspect of what these three are doing. So it's really important. And I don't say that just because it's my job, but it really is. So any questions for me on that?
I would just say, and I apologize, we've been addressed Denver stuff. It's going on at the same time. So as well as state decarbonization. So I think that, you know, the part, and I'm glad I got clarified earlier on the building size. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the huge challenge for you, is finding the groups that can help you connect in, because that's what Denver, we went through this over and over in Denver, trying to reach, you know, because they're doing the 50 to 25,000, right? So they've understood how to hit that sweet spot. And if you already talked about this again, I apologize, but it's really tough because those aren't my members, so I don't have a connection there because the management is less sophisticated. And that's not a negative term. It's just, often, Aunt Marcy left somebody a
Small
building and so
right.
somebody thinks they can manage it themselves or,
Yeah.
because of the size of the buildings, there's management companies that aren't necessarily as apt to spend money on professional development and some of those other things that, the ones that we deal with on a regular basis. And I think that is gonna be the nut. I'm gonna be curious to see how to crack that nut outside of Denver. That's where I'm kind of going with this, because now you've got even some of those smaller communities that, obviously are going to have maybe absentee ownership, right? So if they're, have moved to California or whatever. So I think that's, understanding that going in,
Right.
because the rent roll, while helpful, I don't think was the be all end all. Am I right? When we were dealing with the Denver stuff. So.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd put that on record.
No. Thank you, I appreciate
The record notes it.
it.
Sue, you mentioned providing Suco a lot of information, obviously. Have you also provided perhaps some of the climate action resilience plans for the municipalities? I know that ours is still draft, but it is publicly available so that they can kind of look at the patchwork of different municipalities and their approaches. They start to develop this gestalt, if you will. How do we get everybody on this information?
Right, no, I'm happy to report, yes, that's a great question, Richard, I appreciate it. That has been part of the exhaustive list that I've sent them. Are the links that I have, but also, they research for us, so it's part of their scope to kind of go in and find those and research them, and those plans were definitely on the list of literature that I gave them to please review. Yeah.
Just two quick things, on the community engagement, especially with the CBOs.
Mhm.
One of the biggest challenges I've seen in the rollout of the the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Grant programs that are out there is that many of the CBOs that were really targeted as part of the Justice 40 initiative, those that have not previously received federal funding in the past, it is challenging to be in compliance with federal funding requirements if you've never taken a 2 CFR 200 crash course in your past. And I think one of the things that we can do, especially when we're reaching out to do the kind of preliminary engagement with these CBOs, is to get an understanding of who has had that experience, but not to leave folks behind, to say, how much can we help backfill in terms of that compliance? That's part of our due diligence in terms of
Right.
risk management, but it's also growing capacity to take on, for CBOs to take on future grants as well. Like that was the whole purpose in touching
Right.
folks that have never received these grants in the past. So even if it comes down to the financial basics, the reporting, the accounting, the bookkeeping, procurement documentation, whatever it may be, I would just suggest making sure you set aside a lot of time and brain space to take care of those broad administrative type actions beyond the actual technical scope.
No, I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's completely true. I've worked in the past with pass-through grants, and it can be onerous, depending on the grant amount too. Obviously, that plays into it, what the CBO needs to provide, but that was one of the driving forces in selecting HDR. They have such strong expertise in this realm, working with all shapes and sizes of community-based organizations and knowledge levels, I think most importantly. So, that's the goal, is because with the kind of work that Clay and Mac are doing particularly, and Dr. Walker Ravenel and I talked about this when we had coffee, it's not going to be successful, and I don't mean to paint it in a negative space at all, but it will not be successful with our lower income disadvantaged communities, particularly if we don't have those trusted networks that we can work through. We talked a lot today about the uncertainty federally, that extends to some of these folks, these 1,600 households that we want to retrofit. a lot of these folks are very distrustful of government right now, and it does not make our job any easier. And it makes their lives so much harder. So we really need to make sure that we've got a strong network of folks, you know, trusted individuals who can reach out and help us get this message across.
And
Can
kind
I mention
well,
something?
please.
Also, I think what will be helpful if we can think about what it is that we can't do here. What community needs, so then, because there's just some things, especially there's a lot of gaps between CBOs and federal funding. Just unfortunate, you know, when sometimes when organizations do get them, especially CBOs, they return it because it's so tedious, you know, and
Exactly.
they can't even get past, you know, we're working on a quality assurance document, you know, but even before it end, you know, it's a lot,
Yes.
you know, and I talked to several jurisdictions and, you know, they have the manpower and the capacity to do a lot of those pieces, but you know, you have 2 or 3 people wearing like 10 hats, you know, and they can't. So I think that would be great if we could help, I guess I would say, and give that support for them to let them know, because and literally saying it's going to be okay, because if you, because that's one of those pieces when we talk about environmental racism, Lucy says this very well, is that that's one of the reasons why organizations, CBOs won't apply, because they know what's gonna come with the funding, like what's the catch of that. So I think we can help fill in some of those gaps early on, whomever we select. I think that will make the process smoother. I think they can be more confident because they're gonna do the work, they know how to do it, but to get the funding is the hard part for them.
No, that's exactly right. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
Last thing, and I know we're gonna run short on time, so I'm sorry. But this is the best place to bring it up. I think we've all tangentially alluded to politics as it intersects this particular program, and talking about this in the communications aspect of it. Like, I just wanted to put it out there and get feedback and hear your feedback that, yeah, like things that we would think are naturally apolitical, workforce, good jobs, better buildings, things of that nature, can be perceived by many locally and federally as to be political. And as you move forward with building out the website, materials, all that kind of stuff, I'm not saying that we all have to be hyper diligent, like hypersensitive to every word, everywhere, every piece, but you know, I think this oversight board, if you see something that you're like, that's striking a weird chord, or like, that's not quite phrased the way I think I would have done that, or I think we're gonna really turn off this sector of folks that we're gonna be engaging with, because everything is so charged at the moment. You know, it's kind of our job to kind of set the tone in terms of like, hey, I think that we could change the phrasing, the wording, how we're rolling this out. Or to say, hey, I think this is really gonna grab somebody's attention where we don't really need it to. You know, and it's our job to also kind of set the tone and do our best to say, we're here to do the work, and the work is this. And, you know, obviously in our public communications with other municipalities and like, I mean, DRCOG, you know, you all are very good at this in all of times, but it just happens to be that we're participating in a program that's getting an unusual amount of attention. And so just making sure that we understand when we say things, when we use phraseology and words to describe what we're doing, that we're trying to stay consistent with the communication plan that we're laying out, and that we're just staying regularly.
I think the other part is that there's gonna be this technical piece, right? That's gonna be, so, you know, through the Energize Denver stuff, we found that just getting your benchmarking number correct was difficult. And if these buildings had to hire consultants to help with that, imagine, you know, now in these other communities to get that correct, because then if you're going into building performance standards from there, if that's not correct, the building's kind of doomed, so to speak, from the beginning. And so I feel like that's the other piece of that conversation is, where's the workforce, are the CBOs that can provide that? I mean, we, Energy Office had town hall, when were those town halls, like last fall or the summer or whatever, there was like office hours, right? And there was actually somebody on one of the calls, and so I met with them like had to ask what portfolio manager was. Which, I mean, you're already way behind the 8 ball if you're just now asking what portfolio manager is, and I think you're gonna end up in some of those, or we will end up, but with your communication, you will probably end up in that situation where you will have people who are like, what's portfolio manager?
Yeah, and that's, you know,
And that's a whole
and
different kind of communication.
it is, and unfortunately, that's part of every communications campaign that you have for anything, period. You're working with such a different multi-tiered, you know, demographic that has different levels of knowledge about things, like you just mentioned, and that is always a challenge. And, you know, that's why we're surrounding ourselves with smart people and hoping to plug all of those holes, knowing realistically at the outset, we're not gonna get everybody.
Right.
We just won't, because it's such an enormous program, but we can do our darndest, you know, to get as many as we possibly can, so.
Well, the great thing is there is training that we can, you know, until that technical support is there, you know, there are great webinars through, you know, Energy Star and all of that, but
And I think
again,
that,
it's just when it comes back,
yeah.
getting that answer to them right away so that it doesn't
Right.
seem like
Yeah.
we're prepared.
right. I wanted to go back, Director Bart, to what you mentioned really quickly. I thank you for bringing that up. It can be kind of an elephant in the room. I think that it's absolutely a topic that we can't shy away from. Those conversations, we have them internally, again, a lot. The language might have to be massaged, but it does not change the spirit of this program. And I really want to make that clear. There might be terms that we used in the work plan that, as you said, do not feel like they should be political, period. But right now they are. And we are so aware of that. I'm so glad that you are all aware of it. It does change approach, but it doesn't change the importance of the work. So that's, I think, where we're coming from on that. Thanks for your attention.
I'm gonna suggest that maybe we hold off on Max, because Max is gonna come to us next month to talk about some building science and kind of his program. So maybe we can get through Clay really quick here and then his program next month.
Great. I'm gonna stand. Sitting for a while. Okay, so just a quick refresher on the workforce and industry development programs. Again, kind of 2 things to tackle: current industry contractors, future workforce, lack of people in the trades, and then overall just more diversity and representation in the trades. So that's kind of the approach we're going with here through 3 contracts, or 3 grants, I should say. First, the Contractor Navigation Hub. We had this open for procurement in February, January, closed in February. We've reviewed applications and selected a vendor for this $4.5 million grant, and that is also going to F&B. I wasn't sure if we could name drop before F&B.
The agenda's out, so you can.
Agenda's out. The organization. I don't know where we're laughing at.
Sorry, that's your
The contractor, the vendor is known as the Building Decarbonization Coalition, BDC. Feel free to look them up. Very impressive submittal that they gave us, 93 pages to be exact, with detailed monthly work plan, as well as planning phase, implementation phase, some great, really strong partners that they brought into that as well, and their representation here in Colorado. In fact, Holly Harris, who's an attorney that sits on their team, she's part of our technical committee that reports up to this oversight committee. So really excited about them as the vendor. Again, this is a one-stop shop contractor navigation tool. It will be integrated into the WebEx website. So a lot of collaboration will be required between those 2 vendors, as well as myself and Chris throughout the duration. Probably the biggest lift of this vendor will be the contractor navigation agents. These agents are essentially going to handle all of the paperwork that a contractor might interact with when it comes to installing a heat pump. That includes sometimes up to 5 different rebate portals and selecting eligible equipment. This administrative burden is so cumbersome on a contractor. It has been cited as maybe the top reason why a contractor wouldn't promote a heat pump to a customer. It's just the amount of paperwork they would have to do. So that's such a silly reason, right, to get in the way of decarbonization. So let's have a team of contractors, almost like a help desk, hire an agent to do the paperwork for you. I kind of phrase it as TurboTax for your heat pump project. They will handle all of that and then just present you with a final product. Here's the installation equipment. Go get a happy customer and spend more time on your business instead of on website portals. Really excited about that. 1,000 contractors served throughout the course of this grant is the goal. And BDC actually told us in their submittal they would serve 2,000 contractors. So we'll hold them to that. All right. Next slide, please, Cam. Thank you so much. Second grant, this is addressing the labor gap, the future workforce. This is open for procurement right now on BidNet. If you want to check it out, Green Workforce Hubs, $5.2 million to design and implement 3 green workforce centers across the DRCOG region. So if anyone's familiar with a public workforce center, you can go into a physical office space, sit down with a career coach. So Doug's my career coach, and I say, Doug, I am unemployed. I want a green job. What's a green job? And Doug says, well, Clay, we're going to look at your resume, and it really depends on what you want to get into. You could be an electrician, be an HVAC technician, a pipe fitter. Like the pipe fitter thing sounds great. My uncle was a pipe fitter, and he says, okay, we're going to connect you to a pre-apprenticeship, and then local pipe fitter union 208 has a great registered apprenticeship with guaranteed employment at the end of that. Good paying jobs. By the way, here's what you can expect to make as a pipe fitter, and really set me up on the right path. So those will be available. And you know, by the way, Doug, I don't have a car, and I have 2 kids, and you know, childcare, the cost of childcare these days. Can anyone relate? So is there anything you can do for me? And Doug says, absolutely. We have wraparound services and stipends to cover that. The duration of time, this was kind of tricky as we thought about it. We've decided when you sign up at one of these green workforce hubs, you register for 1 year of programming. Okay, there has to be a start and an end to make sure participants in 2026 get the same treatment as 2028. So 1 year. Okay, so you're telling me you're gonna help me with the cost of childcare for a year while I go through this training? Doug says, absolutely, Clay. You know, you're gonna be all set up for success.
Awesome.
Pretty cool, right? Look at this number, 3,800 new workers added to the building decarb workforce. Okay, that we're holding our vendors to that. And so that's not 3,800 employed. We don't want to incentivize actual job offers. That can lead to some weird dynamics of forcing people into jobs that are maybe not the right fit, or employers that are shady. But adding them to the career pathway track, so at least registering them for training, serving them with some wraparound service, that's the metric we're really looking for. And that follow-up case management. Service doesn't stop. Say I'm 6 months in and I get employed, but does service stop at that 6 months? No, we are going to be there for the full year. And so that means follow-up, looking at retention. Hey, how are things with that employer? Well, culturally, he's made some comments to me about my race, and there's some like jokes that are being made. It doesn't feel like a great fit. Okay, got you. Well, that's absolutely unacceptable. Let's come back in, and we'll look at some different employer options too. We want to look at retention as well as placement. Okay, great. And last program, probably what I'm most excited about, GAPS, Growth Access Programs. These are going to be pilot programs that focus on representation in the building decarb trades. So I envision 3 contracts going out. These are trainings. The first 2 programs are really connectors. These are specific heat pump trainings. So we'll contract an organization out to facilitate and provide a heat pump training. What are the essential core competencies you need to know for an entry-level role? And those trainings will be custom tailored to 3 underserved demographics that we've identified. So one will be a behind the walls justice impacted training. So can we do a full apprenticeship model behind Colorado Correctional Institution walls for folks that are 6 months or less left on their sentence as they start to prepare for life back on the outside? Do they have the right training that's employer led? So are they building a relationship with an employer prior to release? That way they can transition right into employment and stabilization upon release. So that's one program. We've partnered with Colorado Department of Corrections on that. So we have all of their requirements written into that contract. And they're so excited about that. This is job placement helps the prison system, you know, the burden that's on them. When people cycle back into the system, it's often because gainful employment options aren't made available. And it's a systemic cycle. So hopefully this can disrupt that cycle. I'm talking fast, I know we got limited time. Non-native English speakers, this is a huge barrier in Denver. It's a barrier for MAX program. If we want to retrofit 1,600 low-income disadvantaged community households, how many of those households do you think are native English speakers, you know, or is it just limited to English speaking households? I don't want that to be the case. But if a contractor is coming in that doesn't speak your language or doesn't look like you or have cultural, you know, connectedness to you, it's an uncomfortable thing to have someone in your home, your nooks and crannies, ripping out an appliance, putting it in. So can we have not just a translator, but can we have a fluent, we'll say Spanish speaking instructor teaching Spanish speaking students, connecting them to Spanish speaking contractors to install heat pumps in Spanish speaking households. That would be the end goal for that. So again, a separate vendor for that. We're not expecting the justice impacted expert to be the non-native English speaking expert, right? We want subject matter experts applying for these. And then lastly, young adults. So obviously we need the youth engaged in the building science trades. We know statistically, 1/3 of the trades are set to retire in the next decade. So, I mean, this is non-negotiable. So how do we do that? Do we do after school programs, CTE programs? There's a lot of great programs already existing in the region. Can we empower them to expand their reach and create more streamlined pipelines into these trades? I imagine this program, these vendors will connect directly to the green workforce hubs, which maybe then can connect directly to the contractor hub employment. That's my pipe dream. Okay, last slide here are some questions to think about for the group with our 3 minutes. Okay, so let's go to the second bullet because this is actively on my mind right now. I mentioned the green workforce hubs concept. There's going to be 3 of them. Where do they go? You know, it will depend on the vendors and what applicants we get, but we have a large region. How many jurisdictions? 58, 59? Just got a new one now, right? How do we equitably place these workforce centers so that there's access across the whole region? And inevitably some county or jurisdiction will feel left out or feel like, hey, I have to travel 20 miles to get to a workforce center. How is that fair? So let's just do that question for a second, or if anyone has other questions, I'm open to that. But any thoughts on location or strategy to make sure that we're thinking about this equitably across the DRCOG region? Yes, please.
Well, I know one is the pipe fitters up here of I-25 in like Washington area.
Local 208 pipe fitters union. Yeah.
That's, you know, that's I-25 and they'll be the first ones to reach out to, you know, because it really stems out. Anytime ask for a contractor for HVAC and all, you could contact them and they have different independents that are licensed. They can actually do the work. And then, you know, because this green work hub schools would are working with with youth to try to give them those trades. And that's what we're losing. I think the average age for the industry is up in the low 50s of age.
Yeah, I'd
Also
say
truck
about,
drivers,
yeah, about 30-40%, yeah.
yeah. So that's just one area.
I agree. And fortunately, we have someone from local 208 pipe fitters on our technical committee as well, so.
Thank you. Is Randy still on? Sometimes I know it's hard for people online to.
He had to drop off.
Okay. Cause Rocky Mountain Mechanical Contractors, I mean, he's obviously, probably obviously why he's on here, but I think they actually have some experience setting up, they've got like some, I think, campuses across the state, right? That are, so that might be beneficial to pull him. I don't know if he's on that subcommittee with you or.
Yeah, it's less of a subcommittee right now for that, but it will be, again, the Green Workforce Hubs aren't directly providing training themselves. They're really gonna be the connector and kind of match make based on what someone's looking for. But we definitely wanna make sure all the resources from RMMCA are tapped into the Green Workforce Hubs. Yeah.
Front Range Community College, they already have an HVAC program. They cover Westy, Boulder, Fort Collins. So it's a pretty large footprint.
I've looked into that and talked to Katie Schwinn over there. I feel like their HVAC program predominantly is on their Larimer campus, which.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying, before. So I don't know if that.
I've encouraged them to expand to their Westminster campus and beyond, so, and they have an appetite for that as well. So that's great.
And then on that, are you talking to different school districts with their CTE programs to see if any of them have any pipe fitting or electrical?
Yeah, absolutely. Denver Public Schools, we have a great relationship with Leanne Kittle there, as well as, other alternative schools like Cherry Creek Innovation Campus. They kind of look into some different trades. I also think rebranding, the trades, sometimes it's not reaching youth, it's convincing mom and dad that this is better than, going to see Boulder for a liberal arts degree. There's real benefits to this, and you can end generational poverty with a career like this. So how do we not only market to youth, but have those dinner table conversations with mom and dad? Yes.
Yeah, I think about sort of northeast Boulder County and kind of western Weld County, just because for the north, that's such an area of growth in that whole region. There's a lot of younger people, many folks moving there. So just as, and also kind of along the I-25 corridor, but just for the north, that's kind of where I think about something geographically located that would be relatively easy for a lot of the younger folks, especially to get to.
I envision, thank you for saying that. I envision the applicants for the workforce hubs to be public workforce centers. So to be like Boulder County Workforce or Denver Workforce, Arapahoe Douglas Works, that's kind of how they're built, and absolutely what I copied as far as designing the scope of this. So it would fit pretty well, but who knows? I mean, anyone can apply, schools, community colleges can apply. So we'll see. It closes in 2 weeks. So excited to see the applicants.
Make sure you're at Adams County Workforce Center.
Adams County Workforce Center. Yep, absolutely. And Denver has a workforce center in Montbello too, if I'm not mistaken. And one at the airport. So maybe a green workforce hub is at the airport. I mean, we'll see what happens. Are we at time? We are. Unfortunately. Thank you for your thoughts.
I don't have anything to wrap us up other than to say thank you all, and Greg, thank you again for going today, and Mac, thank you for getting punted to next time. Exactly. This will happen again and again. If there are other things that we want to see in terms of reporting out on a monthly basis, looking forward to doing our next meeting virtually. If you have any questions, thoughts on things you'd like to see in terms of financing, staffing, things like that on the regular, please go ahead and send to Robert, and we can look at integrating that. Yes.
So on the report, are we looking at decarbonization as far as what the cities and then the utility United Power is doing?
Well, I would say, for the purposes of the grant, I think, there's the starting point being some of the key kind of just performance metrics around the operations of the grant. But I think as we get further into the implementation side, to your point about seeing key performance indicators of uptake in workforce, uptake in, the power companies, getting tax credits out there, things of that nature. That's ongoing discussions and ones that will be worth having in this first year.
Thank you.
I don't know, anything else? Doug?
No, just thanks for a very good conversation. Sorry, we keep on running over, but it's because of all the amazing feedback we're getting, so we really appreciate it.
Really appreciate that space.
All right, well, y'all have a great one and yeah, safe travels and to wherever you're going back to.
Oh, we get a.
Wait, parking validation, Camp has. If you parked in the garage, just see Camp.